Awesome. Okay, that's great. All right. Hello, everyone coming in. I appreciate all of you being patient with us. I think that we're going to have probably about 40 individuals total today, it looks like. Numbers are rising up as people are coming back in once we started. I'll just give a quick introduction here and then we'll get started. So welcome everyone. This is our 9th webinar, I believe, in our series called Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology. We are really happy to have all of you joining us. I am your host, as always, Aaron Stoller. I currently serve in the industrial sector as an applied ecologist for ExxonMobil Biomedical Sciences Incorporated. We are a group that is within the larger ExxonMobil organization. I work on biodiversity. I work on a variety of different topics, which I'm not going to get into today because the conversation is about other careers and their pathways. I also have served as I currently serve as senior chair for ESA's public and private sector ecologist section, which we can talk more about a little bit later after Sandra gives some announcements during the intermission. The purpose of this webinar is to share stories and guidance for all job seekers in the world of ecology. For many of you, these are very interesting times. If there are any U.S. federal workers who have been laid off, please know that we are standing with you and we are trying to help everyone figure out the next career pathway for you if you haven't already figured it out for yourself. There are an abundance of ecology careers available in state, government, industry, consulting, education, nonprofit organizations, etc. And ecologists in these positions are leading incredibly fulfilling careers that are helping to translate research into sustainable futures. These ecologists are also generating novel research in collaboration with partners across sectors in academia. The purpose of this webinar is really just to help everybody find their career opportunities that will really lift up their life and make them enjoy the field of ecology even more. We hope to broaden networks to provide a bit of hope for those that might be struggling to find their niche or who have been unfortunately displaced from their niche, and to help ESA cast a wider and more inclusive net over the professional ecological world. With me today, I have two extremely talented researchers, including David Taylor and Tina Mozelewski. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. Oh, sweet. And I also have Sandra Del Rio, who is just listed as ESA Webinars. We're going to officially change her name so that we don't have to do that anymore. So she's gonna give us a quick intermission. She's actually with the Ecological Society of America. She's gonna talk briefly halfway through about our upcoming meeting and a variety of other announcements, and then we'll switch to the other person. We're gonna talk with who did I say we were gonna talk with first in the email?
David.
Okay, we're gonna talk. I can't remember anymore. We're gonna talk with David first, and then we'll talk with Tina. And please do ask questions. There is a Q&A button at the bottom. If you can avoid asking questions in the chat, that would help us. If you can just ask the questions in the Q&A, that would be better, because that way we can address those questions online in real time. If we don't get around to your question, don't worry. I do send all the questions out to our speakers afterwards, and I get them to answer those questions, and then we send all of the answers out to the participants. And my understanding is that we have a blog that is coming up very shortly that will include all Q&As from this and past webinars to help guide everyone and be a reference. So, David, you're first. Let's instead of me fumbling over introductions, I've already fumbled over this one enough. Okay. I'm going to let David introduce himself and talk about his career, and then I'll come in with some questions.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. And hi, everyone. I hope you're having a good day. I was just talking with Sandra earlier about the kind of challenging times that my students are faced with. So real quickly, as a way of introduction, so I'm David Taylor. I'm an associate professor and interim director of sustainability studies in the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences at Stony Brook University. that's a long title, just saying basically that I'm working with my colleagues in a program that's interdisciplinary. So within the School of Marine Atmospheric Sciences and Sustainability, we have three divisions. One is focused primarily, again, on atmospheric and has just introduced a climate science major. The marine program has been here for now over 50 years, I think, and has long supported Long Island's commitment to sort of natural resources in the marine world. And then as of the last 20 years or so, sustainability has become a part of it because what the folks in marine and atmospheric began to realize is that much of what they were missing was the human component. So that means in some ways with sustainability, our program's focused on issues of primarily social science and also questions of economics, and then even some of those in the humanities. So one of the things is we have different majors in sustainability. One of these is environmental design and policy, which is focused on policy, sort of resilient design, especially after Sandy that was here. That's become a bigger issue. And then now in collaboration with the folks in atmospheric and marine, we're really developing a coastal resiliency program. The other side is I have a colleague who focuses on environment and human impact, who comes from an ecologist background. And she really looks at the questions of soil ecology, toxins like glyphosate, crumb rubber, and other issues. And then actually I lead the environmental humanities program, which is an odd mix of the folks who really want to do more communication and outreach working with agencies and nonprofits. But my students who end up taking classes in ethics and writing and arts also have to have a higher level of math, a higher level of science, and then also get through a modeling class, and then also work on having just a whole different mindset than a traditional humanities kind of degree. So in some ways, our students end up going from their degree programs to typically working with agencies or nonprofits. They may go into graduate school, but typically they will look for work here in New York and in the Northeast that typically will look at some of the nonprofits in on Long Island if they want to stay in sort of marine or coastal. But many of the agencies and nonprofits also are in the city or even in Albany, which is where the state capital is. And if you've ever been to New York, it's kind of odd. Our state capital is one of the most remote places in the state. It's a little different than everything else. So we spend a lot of time making sure our students have a lot of diverse skills. This is something we spend a lot of time on. Every one of our students has a solid background in GIS, typically 3 or 4 courses. We actually have a GIS certificate program that we really do actually suggest for the students because it offers them different career options. Those students who come from the environment and human impact often take many of the classes in ecology and evolution, another department we have here on campus, and we work really closely with them. We spend a lot of time trying to talk to our students about diversity of skill sets and diversities of communities. Be sure that you have ways of thinking about working with different groups of people and that you have a portfolio either as an undergraduate or a graduate working with diverse populations on the human side as well as diverse places that you're working with in terms of your science. That's the one where for me then I tell this story to people. I was talking to Aaron and Tina earlier. So my own background is a very interesting one where I started at the university years ago, and I had thought, man, I just love the natural sciences. I can't wait. This is what I'm going to do. I'd spent so much of my time as a high school student outdoors. And the person teaching my biology course was the absolute worst professor I think who's ever taught. And I walked out of that class and I said, I will never study this again. And my professors in English were quite good. And so even though I got through calculus and everything, I went ahead and moved my major to English and also then to philosophy. But always with an idea that I was always improving my work outdoors, and I was always working with naturalists and trying to stay sort of educated on these topics. During my master's, I happened to take one of the first environmental ethics class that was ever taught in the United States. And it really shaped me for what I was doing. And then by the time I was doing my PhD, I actually had an interdisciplinary committee made up of an American studies person, a philosopher, someone from the sciences. And I really looked at the sort of influence of mid-19th century American science on different writers during the time, sort of looking at the changes with Asa Gray and George Lyell and Darwin and others during that time period that was so influential. So when I was finally moving around looking for jobs, I've worked both a little bit in the private sector with nonprofit groups doing preservation work and then also activism. And then as I was finding a career in academics, I was always fighting hard to be in interdisciplinary programs, which is how I ended up at Stony Brook. To my mind, that's the one thing that I spend a lot of time talking to our students about, is that the key issues we face now, I think certainly requires training, and you need to have defined skills. But I think the more you can reflect on the diversity of those skills and the communities that you work with, both natural and human, that that will actually give you a lot of options in thinking about both your future, but also finding different kinds of jobs. So I think I'll stop there.
That was fantastic. Your career history and your academic history resonates so much with me. I had no idea I was going to have that kind of resonance during this session. I changed my major personally 6 times, and I also had an awful biology teacher in high school and in college. And I actually was an art major, and then I was a physics major for a little bit, an engineering major. And I am of the generation where these sustainability institutes and these integrative majors were cropping up already, and so I was able to grab a hold of it in my senior year. And what I found, and what you just described, still resonates, that it is such an integrative major that all of my previous coursework counted, and I was still able to graduate in 4 years, which I didn't really need to do. I had a scholarship, and they would have funded me, but it all counted, so I was able to. So thank you so much for like sort of my own self confirmation. I really appreciate that. I have to ask, what is your most um, inspirational or favorite environmental writer? Oh, yeah, you're muted. Sorry.
So just off the top of my head, so Gary Snyder actually turned 95 just last week, and he's one of the longtime California West Coast writers and environmental thinkers, and just a really inspirational figure. So yeah, and there really are some, like I just last year had Elizabeth Bradfield to campus, who is an outstanding poet, just took over as the director of the Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at Western Colorado, but she also leads the whale watching tours off of Cape Cod. She is an outstanding marine naturalist. So yeah, so
Love.
these are the things where I think, being a little bit older, seeing, the somewhat younger generation, that they're a lot more open to interdisciplinarity than what my university was able to offer when I was going through. So, and that's inspiring for me.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. These sustainability institutes, as I mentioned to you before, they're cropping up all over the place, and they really are pulling people from all different majors in recognition that in order to address these world problems right now, we really need to bring in experts from all over the place. Um, this is advantageous for people to know. One thing that I remember a lot when I was advising students as an assistant professor is people would come to me and be like, I love everything. It's so hard for me to settle down on a topic. I love photography, I love art, I love music, and I wish there was some way for me to incorporate them all. And it sounds like, you know, you are participating and helping to build something that can actually do that. What do you think is actually the contribution of the humanities to environmental sciences?
There. So this is actually, I think this is a great question. So um, this is the one where I've talked to my colleagues. One of my marine, uh, he's sort of a physical oceanographer, but he's, you know, in his early 80s, and he's been so involved with Long Island issues about, you know, coastal preservation or sort of looking at kinds of other marine issues. Just a fascinating figure in the history of Long Island. And I remember he was saying, you know, that one of the discouraging things for him is, for having been here on Long Island since the 70s, having worked and published and done so much, the relative return on some of these in terms of policy, in terms of preservation. And he said that it's only been in the last 10 years that he started realizing he had to be a bit more of a spokesperson, and not just, as he would, this is not my words, right? I don't say this, not a scientist who stays in his lab, that he wants to be a little bit more active, to sort of begin to be a little more vocal about what these things might mean. And if you know about this, that often for scientists is a very dangerous kind of, you know, kind of place to take, because you come off sounding like an advocate, which then may bias your science, which may not necessarily be the way you would want to go. I think the one thing with the humanities is that we have an understanding how to craft story. We have an understanding of how to communicate across different kinds of groups and stakeholders. And I think for the humanitarians interested in environmental issues, we have to be a little bit more pragmatic than we might be if we were in a creative writing program, not worrying about audience. I spend a lot of time talking with my students, thinking about rhetoric, audience, communication, purpose, goals, and not in the sense of you're creating propaganda, but that you're taking good scientific evidence and you're communicating this across different stakeholders in a way that's going to create some kind of agreement or some level of consensus to move forward. And so I think the humanities has that capacity to build story and culture. And I think that's been a long time kind of missing gap. But I always tell, you know, my students that, but that story begins with good science, because if it's not good science, who really cares what the story is about the environment, unless it begins with good science? Because otherwise it just ends up being somebody's sort of emotional response that may be on one side or the other. It needs good science to begin it. But then it has to think about different forms of communication. It has to come across in different media. It has to come across in different ways to different groups of people who would find it more valuable for them. And I think that's what the humanities can begin to offer.
Yeah, that's really great. So for any students that are interested in writing communication, or anybody that's thinking about transitioning to this as to writing as a career, um, it might seem like a daunting task if you're not currently in college. But so if you're in the middle of a career transition after college, after graduate school, and you want to break into the field of scientific writing, what would you recommend?
Um, this is the one where there are some, honestly, if it were me, I would begin with an environmental journalism class. I think that's one. We actually here at Stony Brook have the Alan Alda Center for Science Communication. And it's really focused on this idea of how do we communicate good science? The other one is this question of then, as you have a solid background, and I think journalism is a good way to begin this, that you think about the craft of writing. You think about this in a way that you're reaching out to different groups. But I think this other way of really considering what are the groups, who is the audience here? Who's reading? Why are they considering this? How are they engaging this information? When are they engaging this information? That to me is one where I do think some of the broader questions around um, environmental humanities with nature writing, which again, I think can be very powerful in its own way, but too often, to be honest, it's only read by the same group of people. I think it needs to be reconsidered so it reaches out to different audiences. This is something I'm working on with a larger group with the Outdoor Writers Association of America, is we're working on a huge project of pairing conservation and preservation pieces next to each other by two people who live in the same area. And the whole goal being, how would you communicate this, these different values? So that to me is another possibility. And then the last one I would say is, and this is something I'm spending a lot of time on with right now, is looking at value systems. One of the nicest things I heard at ESA last conference was the discussion on value systems and science. And I thought that was such an important discussion, which begins with why? What's the value system you have in this? I think most people who are involved in any question of sustainability or ecology have at the core that they value the non-human world. That's fine. That's a great value. Now, how do you articulate that in a way, and how do you begin to really refine that in a way so that you can communicate that to other people who have similar values, who also care about the natural world, but don't quite know how to maybe think about it in the same way. And I think that's the part where between value systems and science, we can do a better job of communicating those.
So I want to give a shout out to all of the advisors that have guided me in my understanding of indigenous and traditional ecological knowledge, because everything you're saying, in my brain, I'm thinking to myself, oh, but indigenous people have been telling stories to communicate science for more than 10,000 years. And I want to couch what you're saying as just a modern interpretation of something that we temporarily seem to have given up in science and is now being resurrected, because we are in an age of communication, but we rapidly have found out that communication is not all alike, and communication is a skill that has to be practiced in order to communicate effectively, honestly, transparently. So I love what you're saying, and I also, for anyone that's interested, I had no idea about this Outdoor Writers Association of America. I just did a brief look on their website, and it looks like that's a great place for a want-to-be writer to maybe get some traction, a little bit of attention, some training, some peer review. Is that a correct interpretation of the OWAA?
Yeah, many of these folks have a background in what we'll call sometimes the hook and bullet stories, right? But again, from a conservation perspective, I found some of the best uh, naturalists are hunters and fishermen who responsibly go about both, right? And so to my mind, it's the one where I like all of those stories as long as people go about this in a responsible way. The other part, though, with the Outdoor Writers Group is they're really growing more among the younger folks for things like outdoor writing, like hiking, kayaking, communication, and communicating science. And this is the one that I'm pushing them and thinking about this a lot, is we need to be thinking about this in the tradition of the naturalists, such as Aldo Leopold, back to Muir, and Anne Bastille, and so many others that you can go back through, and they were really, really well considered naturalists who thought about the idea of telling story as a way to sort of get across these ideas. And again, I really want to stress, though, that should never mean the cost of science. That's my one fear, is that that means somehow you dilute the science, and I would argue against that every time. One of my colleagues here, who's probably Long Island's best wildlife photographer, he and I just created a nature writing and photography class. But most of our students come from marine or from ecology and evolution. They don't really come from the humanities. And we're really spending a lot of time talking to them about who do you see as your audience? And by the way, this is a nice second gig, to be a private sort of writer and a private sort of photographer, and do this as when you're finished with work, or while you're at work, if you can grab the camera, great. And you can hustle up a little bit of money on the side. But the other part that we've spent a lot of time talking about is it also has a huge community impact. My colleague, Chris Paparo, runs every 2 weeks he organizes what's called a geek talk at one of the breweries here, and we get 70 to 80 people every 2 weeks on a topic about something around the environment, something that is going on. And the rule is, if you have a scientist or if you have someone else, the rule is you have to be able to communicate it to people who are drinking beer, and there can't be charts or graphs. It has to be a good story,
Oh my God, I love that so
right?
much.
But one of the nicest things is the group of people who are coming, you've come to find out how much they love the East End of Long Island, how much they enjoy having a beer as they're listening to someone talk to them who has a level of expertise and background. And that's the one where we just had some of the folks from the Cornell Cooperative Extension who are marine fisheries. And they were spending a lot of time talking to Long Islanders about the seafood that they get and that how little actual seafood they eat that's from Long Island among our 10 to 15 commercial fishermen who are still out there. And so this was such a good talk because all of these people really care, but they're buying unsustainable seafood instead of buying local seafood. And that's the kind of talk that you can have over beer with some good information, lots of nice pictures. And by the way, 3 of my students also work for them now, from sustainability. So it's really nice to see that sort of legacy begin to take hold.
So, I mean, I love this idea. This get together that what do you call it that when you this meeting that you
Geek
have?
geek talk. I'll
Geek
put it.
talk.
Yeah,
Yeah, is that like it seems like a nerdy version of Toastmasters for a very specific niche, and I love it because it's perfect for this audience. But is that replicated elsewhere? Do you know of any other?
that I do not know. But I will. I'm going to send. I'll put in the chat here some of the events of the way this works out. It's the one where, and if anyone's really interested in replicating this, I'll put you in touch with Chris Paparo, who runs it. But it is the one where it's such a nice venue for making something that might seem intimidating for some people not be intimidating. It's in a casual sort of environment. There's a beer, and we do have to spend some time, especially with some of the atmospheric folks, that they not show us a lot of coding, that they not show us a lot of, getting through their science per se, but rather can you communicate this in a way where you're engaging people about these
Yeah.
questions? And you can talk then about issues of sea level rise in a county that quite honestly I think probably has some reservations on that, but you can talk about it in a way that I think feels less threatening. So that's the part
Yeah.
to me it seems a very successful model.
I, it is true. So Sandra put this in the chat to everybody. They're running a session called Science on Tap at the
Mm,
Ecological meeting in Baltimore.
nice.
And you've given me such a great idea. I've had it in my mind to start up this kind of Toastmasters thing in my local community for a while. For those of you that don't know what this Toastmasters, because I've mentioned it twice now, Toastmasters is a chance for you is a kind of like it's a national organization, but there's also clubs everywhere locally where you can just go and talk in at an informal audience, and they can give you feedback. And it just sounds like this. And I imagine that you have this gigantic red candy cane thing for taking those climate scientists off the stage when they start showing all these numbers and graphs. Um, but it would be really fun. I think, Sandra, we have to figure out how to get this more formalized for ESA so that other people can start up geek. What did you call it? It's not Geek Squad. Nerd. Whatever.
Geek talks. Yeah.
Geek Talks. Yeah,
Yeah.
Geek Squad is a copyrighted, trademarked logo for Best Buy. I can't say that. Anyways, all right. So we are. This was great. Thank you so much. I could talk about science writing and humanities with you all day long. And I do want to just, for everyone that's listening, if you happen to be a student and you have a mentor that is telling you something like the humanities and science are two very separate things, I need you to give them the recording for this so that they can all listen to David talk about science writing and the humanities as this essential component of science, because I really think that it's becoming less of a problem among mentors, but there are still some holdouts, I think, in academia that think that science and humanities are two very different things. All right, so we do have some questions coming in on the chat, and David, I would encourage you, if you click on that Q&A button and you see any questions that you think you can answer, you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but if you can answer some of them just by saying type answer, please go ahead and do that. Again, no pressure to answer all of them right now if you can't or you don't want to. I am going to turn this over to Sandra for a brief 5-minute intermission to talk about ESA. So take it away.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks, David and Tina. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Del Rio. I'm the Professional Programs Coordinator at the Ecological Society of America. Thank you for joining us today for the 9th session of Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology webinar series. We have one more session, and that's going to be on June 10th. You can register for them in ESA's webinar page. I will be sharing all the links in the chat in just a moment, and you can also access the recordings of past webinars there. I also want to share some valuable professional development opportunities that are available through ESA. We have the Quantitative Methods Workshop series by ESA's Black Ecologists section with topics such as meta-analysis in ecology, individual-based modeling, spatial, statistics, and machine learning. Additionally, I like to mention ESA's Professional Ecologist Certification Program. Oh my gosh. For those who might not know, ESA does have a certification program, and it has been around for over 40 years. In fact, David and Aaron are certified. So if you want to learn more about this program, go to esa.org/certification, or feel free to email us at cert@esa.org with any questions. And now the ESA 2025 annual meeting, late-breaking posters, abstract submissions, that's open. That call is open. In addition to scientific abstracts, this year we're accepting submissions of project proposed posters. So what that means, it's a format for sharing projects that are still in the planning stages, and you just want to get feedback on design or goals. There's an option there for you as well. Additionally, early bird registration rates are now available until June 26th. So get the best registration rates possible. And during the annual meeting week, we'll have Career Central and various career workshops. On Monday, we'll feature a career fair and hiring event. And then Thursday, we'll focus on college education, environmental education, and related topics. Additionally, there is funding support available. There are registration and dependent care grants. We are giving priority to federal scientists and those who have lost their position or funding due to federal cuts. The selection group will also consider your involvement in ESA and your responsibilities at the meeting, such as presenting or even late-breaking poster, having a late-breaking poster session. And those have a deadline of May 15 as well, just like the other call. Support is also available through ESA sections and chapters, and those awards vary and have different deadlines. So please see the ESA website for more information. And I also want to share other career resources we have through ESA. We have a career center powered by Wiley. It allows you to post resumes and search for job opportunities. There's also our Ecolog listserv for more job postings, and you can access ESA's online communities. You just need a basic web account, and jobs are posted there as well. Again, I will be resharing any links if I did not share them in the chat already. I have not, but thank you for your attention, and back to you, Aaron.
Thank you. Unless Sandra tells me otherwise, I am hoping that we can keep these webinars going. We do have one more that's scheduled officially on the website, but I'm going to hopefully make a call out to more people to get more careers talking to each other, more people talking with each other, and more networking done, because I just frankly enjoy doing it. And people seem to keep on signing on for every one of these sessions. So we'll do it as long as the numbers are above 0. And I also do want to give a shout out to Sandra and the whole ESA group for this annual meeting, and particularly for Career Central. I will definitely be there. I have, for better or for worse, become heavily involved in Career Central. I love the opportunity to help others find their careers, and ESA is just such a great informal meeting that's relatively inexpensive for people to meet other people. We're hosting a mixer. Like I said, I'm currently senior chair of the public and private ecologist section. We're hosting a mixer during the meeting on the Monday of that meeting at the Pratt Street Ale House, and we are really, really pumped. Hopefully I can meet people, and if you see me and you recognize my name, just come up, shake my hand. As with everybody on these webinars, please do contact them. I am putting their contact information in the chat. Please do reach out to them if you would like to, if you would like some additional advice, or just follow them on LinkedIn. Tina, I am going to turn to you now. And again, I would really love it if you could just introduce yourself, your career, and how you got there.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tina Mozelewski. I am a conservation biologist and terrestrial ecologist. And right now I am the technical program manager at the Spatial Informatics Group Natural Assets Laboratory. I guess the winding career journey. My undergrad, I did degrees in environmental science and biology, double majored. And then I did a master's in ecology, evolution, and systematics. I did a non-thesis option, and then had always kind of wanted to go do the PhD route, maybe go into academia. But after finishing my master's, just needed a break. And so kind of found myself facing the like, what do I do now? And how do I know I would want to be a professor? Because I've never taught anything. And was just really trying to figure out next steps. And so I was an educational interpreter at the St. Louis Zoo for a little while. And then I was an intern for the Missouri Department of Conservation, where I did bird banding population demographic studies, but mostly mowed a lot of grass, like acres and acres and acres. I can wield an Exmark 360 mower like nobody's business. And then finally got a habitat biologist position at Arizona Game and Fish. So moved to Yuma, Arizona, and lived there for a little over 2 years, working as their habitat biologist. I planned and coordinated riparian restoration projects. I reviewed development proposals and responded to those from Game and Fish's perspective, and talked about ways to avoid or minimize or mitigate impacts. It just kind of represented the state, and especially the Yuma region, as their wildlife biologist. And then got a job after that for Clark County, Nevada, as their riparian restoration project manager. So moved up to Nevada. And then this whole time was like, I still feel like I want to go and do the PhD route, but I don't know, just trying to figure it out. And I got into a PhD program at Portland State with the wonderful Rob Scheller. And so I moved up to Portland and started my PhD. And about 8 months in, Rob accepted a new job at North Carolina State. So I moved to North Carolina, finished my PhD out there in Raleigh, which wound up, I was salty about it first, but wound up being a really wonderful move. And then I postdoced at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where I worked for the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. And then I moved across the country again to Seattle, which is where I'm based now. I worked for 2.5 years at Conservation Science Partners as a lead scientist there, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, but operates a bit like in the nonprofit space, but also a bit like a consultancy, and also kind of a science organization, all rolled into one. And then I've been at the Spatial Informatics group, which is a nonprofit, but focused heavily on science and research to support local, state, and federal governments and other partners for a month. So pretty new.
Jeez. So what are you going to do with the second half of your life? Jesus Christ, that's a lot of different jobs and a
Hopefully
lot of
not
different.
more moves. Yeah, so I'm glad that you shared my email address, because I feel like if I can help anybody with anything, it's that at this point I've kind of worked in about every sector. And so if you have questions about specific sectors, I'm so happy to try my best to answer them.
So, okay, I have a bajillion questions and so little time to do it. I'm going to put your email address again, just so people. So, all right. The first thing on my mind is that we probably have a spectrum of people in the audience who, on one side, totally think that moving like that for careers and postdoc and graduate schools is amazing. And on the other side, we probably have people that are so daunted by that because of ties to their location, either partner or family, friends. You talked about this as if you had no problem whatsoever with moving. And I'm going to guess that that's not exactly true. So I would love for you to give the audience advice right now on being mobile in the workforce and in environmental sciences.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say that the ability to move is a privilege that I've had. Like, and I mean that from not like it's an honor to be able to move, but it's a privileged position to have that level of flexibility. And I know that. Like, I've had my parents have flown out and helped me, drive the U-Haul or whatever. So it's a privileged position to even have that option available to me. For me, I think I just had such a drive to be in this field, and to be in this field in really specific ways. And I think the one thing I'll say is that I think especially now, but just always for ecology and conservation biology, as you're getting started, flexibility is super important. And that doesn't have to mean locational flexibility. For me, it did. And I think that's why I was able to get that habitat biologist job at Game and Fish. Like, everybody else in that position in the other regional offices were 10 or 15 years my senior, but no one wanted to move to Yuma. And so I did, and I got the job. But if you don't want to or don't have the option of being locationally flexible, then I think figuring out how to get your foot in the door and being flexible to what that looks like is really important. And you just have to figure out what flexibility works for you, what's tolerable to you, what you can handle. But yeah, I mean, at first, I am from Missouri. That wasn't really where I wanted to stay. So moving was really exciting. As I've gone about it and gotten older and moved so many times, I don't want to move again. I love Seattle. It's become increasingly important to me, I think, after all of these moves and as I've gotten older, to be someplace and be rooted and to feel like I am someplace that feels like home and in building a community. So it's been hard. Each time I've moved, I haven't known anybody. I've moved by myself. I've started from scratch. I have had to build community back up. And so I've been more resourceful and braver and more outgoing than I knew I could be. And all of that's valid and valuable. And also, it was really freaking hard. So both things are true.
Yeah. This really resonates with my own personal experience, and I'll just add a couple of thoughts there. So for fish and game, or fish and wildlife, whatever the state chooses to call it, I do think that careers for them, you do have to expect some level of mobility. If you're going to start out like hoping for that in undergraduate, so I live in New Jersey, and fish and wildlife in New Jersey basically is there's not a whole lot of wildlife, and most of the fish are stocked, right? And so like there's not a lot of opportunities for fish and wildlife in this area where I'm at. And so I've always had to encourage those people who are interested in fish and wildlife to move. to areas where those opportunities currently exist. I'm not suggesting that there aren't opportunities for fish and wildlife where people are, but for your personal career history, it does sound like the ability to move really did help with that choice of career.
Yeah, I would say for sure. I also think like if you are doing undergrad or doing your master's at a big state school or just any school that has really strong ties to the state wildlife organization or agency, like I did my PhD, finished my PhD at NC State. They have a conservation biology degree program that has really strong inroads to North Carolina. Oh gosh, whatever I can't remember anymore, but they're, wildlife and fisheries agency. And so
Yeah.
I think that helps if you can network, if you've got those options available to you in your degree program and can network, then awesome. Like the state forestry agency, the state wildlife agency, tap into those. That's fantastic. I did not have that. And so I think that I probably did have to move to kind of follow this career path that I did. I don't think everybody does, but for me, I think that my other option was to like keep interning at Missouri Department of Conservation and take a second job and try and like maybe work my way up eventually. And so I think it really accelerated my career path, being willing to move. Yeah.
So you're saying either you can move to networks that you've identified, or you can hustle yourself and your career as much as possible where you are to identify the network there. And both of those are difficult. Both of those are going to require a lot of work. All right, so let's talk about your current job, because I have no idea what Signal. Am I saying it? That's how I say it.
Uh-huh.
I have no idea what they do, and I don't really have much of an idea of what you do day to day. So I would love to learn. And then I do have a follow-up question that I already have planned. So please tell us about your current profession.
Yeah, so what I do right now as a technical program manager, there is a collaborative that is supported by Google that's called the AI Collaborative for Wildfires. And this collaborative is made up of about 15 different agencies and organizations and universities that are all trying to leverage artificial intelligence to enable earlier detection and better prediction of wildfires. And so that's everything from organizations that are launching satellite constellations to be able to detect wildfires from satellite imagery, to the folks building the wildfire detection and prediction models and algorithms, to folks on the ground that are trying to respond to wildfires, and everything in between. My job right now, which won't be my job forever, but just kind of getting my foot in the door at Signal, is to be the manager and the cat herder of this collaborative, and to make sure that basically all of these folks that are working in kind of their wildfire silos all start working together and leaving their silos and basically creating like a 1 + 1 = 3 situation. You're all doing amazing work. How do we leverage that and get you all doing amazing work together so that the value is more than the sum of the parts?
Okay, I have another question I have to ask right now, because I am personally interested in the answer. How do you develop that skill to herd cats? And I don't mean like literally herding cats. I clearly like I also like lead teams of collaborators that work in very different fields. I am currently working with people in machine learning, and I understand maybe every third word that they're talking about, but it is my job to make sure that 1 + 1 does equal 3 in these meetings. How did you gain that skill? And for those people that might be interested in that kind of job, how do you recommend people get that skill?
Yeah, one of the things that's been a kind of like common thread throughout my career is participating in and then ultimately leading these collaborative and co-production groups that involve state and federal agencies, that involve nonprofits, that involve academic researchers. Like even at Game and Fish, one of my main responsibilities is there's something called the Lower Colorado River multi-species conservation program. And it's Arizona, California, and Nevada. All of the water and power users along the river pay into this massive program to get their Endangered Species Act compliance. And then it funds a ton of habitat restoration and conservation. And I was part of that working group. So I wasn't leading it, but I sat in on it and saw how people kind of coordinated these big group meetings. So I've been engaged in that most of my career, and it went from participating and kind of learning to then ultimately leading. But one of the things that I think I have realized through this is I really enjoy the relationship building. I love getting to know people. I love fostering relationships and collaboration. I really believe that science done in silos is not as good as science that's done collaboratively and co-produced. And especially if you're working with managers, if they're not working with you, then your science is going to get shelved and it's probably not actually going to be used in the way that you hope. So I just like working.
I have a
with
feeling
people.
that David is being like, I wanted to say that. That sounds great. I wanted to. That's perfect. I love that. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that is fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah. So just I like working with
yeah.
people.
So, you must feel in these meetings like an imposter sometimes. If you don't, then I'm going to need you to tell me how not to do that, because I clearly think constantly, I have no idea what they're talking about. How did I end up in these meetings? How do you deal with imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel that way now. Every time you start a new job, right? You're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And especially now, I am working with people like for my PhD, I used landscape simulation modeling. For my postdoc, I did species distribution modeling. But this is a whole different level of science and tech that I have no background in. So I don't know the really technical components of these AI systems and how they all connect. I also know the later half of the wildfires and the science that informs management and how you think through the information needs and translate that into decision making. But actually, how do we detect wildfires, boundary tracking, things like that? Also, no clue, haven't done it before. And so I feel like that now. But I think that I try and come as prepared as possible to the meetings. I have coworkers that have PhDs in this stuff. And so talking to them and being like, here is what I'm hearing. Is that right? Does that make sense? Like having those gut checks is really helpful. And then I think the other piece is I just try and show up really authentically, and I'm not afraid. And you have to pay attention to how you do this and the way that it's phrased, because you still want to come across as professional. But I don't think there's any problem with saying, like, this is not my field of expertise. So can we break this down a little bit so I can understand what you're saying and ultimately help you achieve your goals, and help this collaborative function better? And so I just don't have any problem saying, I don't know what's happening. Can somebody explain it?
You say that you don't have any problem saying that, but I think that being able to say that is a skill that's acquired over time, of initially not wanting to say it, saying it, not getting a negative response, saying it again, not getting a negative response, occasionally saying it and being like, somebody says, oh, I expected you to know that.
Yeah.
Going back, reevaluating. And I think it's something that's just learned through practice. Some people are completely stone-faced and able to just enter into something and have no shame in saying, I don't know that. But for a lot of people, not knowing something is scary, but it's an acquired skill to be comfortable with it. All right, so the last question I have for you, and this is going to add into, I think, Jerry's question about what prompted you to pursue your PhD. You changed paths a lot. And, in thinking about what encourages people to change careers or change pathways, there's a lot of reasons. It could be for family. It could be for personal reasons. It could be for money. How do you know when it's time to change?
Yeah. I am just somebody who's really passionate about what I do. And like when I left Game and Fish, I hated living in Yuma and I got paid no money. And so I was trying to leave most of the time that I was there. That was an easy choice. But when I moved to Vegas and I got that job in Vegas, I actually was getting paid reasonably. I was rock climbing every weekend. I had a great community. I loved it. Um, but I had always wanted to be a professor. I, unlike you and David, had an amazing conservation biology professor who taught almost through storytelling. And it was the most impactful, one of the most impactful people in my life still. And I was like, I want to be this guy when I grow up. And so I just always had that drive to go back for my PhD. And then working for Arizona Game and Fish and helping with these riparian restoration projects, I saw a ton of money, like millions of dollars being invested in conservation and in restoration with a ton of staff people and a ton of expertise behind them, like really the best case gold standard conservation. But climate change wasn't incorporated into their project planning. And so they planted these amazing restoration projects. The trees started growing faster. The focal species started showing up earlier than they expected. Everybody's patting themselves on the back. They were great. And then the drought hit in the desert Southwest and they ran out of water and trees started dying and they had to scale back their planning. And I was like, there has to be a better way. Like, how do we think about incorporating climate change and other drivers of change into our planning? There's never enough money to go around in conservation. So how do we use computer models and new technology strategically to try and like hedge our bets and decide what conservation to do where that's going to be a little more viable? So that was what in the research that inspired me to go back to for my PhD, but it was that drive to like go back into academia. And that's what I've wanted to do forever. I still would love to go the academic route and be a professor at some point. But in that work-life equilibrium, balance, whatever, the life piece just started weighing more. And so if a job opened up at UW, I would apply in a heartbeat. But I don't want to do 1 million moves, like do another postdoc, then take a faculty job in the middle of the country, then take another like I just wanted to be someplace and be rooted. And so it just was shifting priorities that kind of led me to where I am now.
That's great. Because I was gonna ask you, it's like, well, what are you gonna do now? Like, you've been moving around all this time and you told me that you're kind of thinking of rooting down where you are. Not that a move isn't in your future, but you know, you've been so passionate about changing careers, not for reasons that I would have guessed, which are usually like money, family, but because you're actually passionate about that career change. And so, like, what happens? I hope that nobody from your business is listening, but what happens when you, in your current profession, you decide, like, I think I need a change? Do you feel comfortable approaching your current profession saying, like, I want to do something else and here's why?
Yeah, I mean, I don't totally know what that looks like. But I think that I'm realizing that like there are more options, especially when sorry to say it for folks that are trying to like just get their foot in the door. I don't know. Maybe this is encouraging, maybe it's not. But I think I would consider myself mid-career level at this point. And there is more flexibility there, I think, than I realized. And so talking to my supervisor and being like, is there a way to do both, to like plug in at UW and teach and like what does that look like? And I think there's maybe more options than I realize. But I don't really know what the future holds. And I think that's the other piece, is just being a little okay with not knowing and the uncertainty. So we'll see.
And constantly doing gut checks with yourself too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like what I'm doing right now feels great, and we'll go from there.
Well, we are at time. I want to thank both of you so much for just the candid conversation. I have 2 questions in the chat that I have copied down. So Sandra, there's no need for you to send them to me, and I will send them out to both David and Tina. Thank you to both of you for answering any questions in the background. It's been really appreciated. Please do contact us. The people that are on these webinars are here because they want to help. They want to talk. They want to network. And honestly, like, you're not gonna insult anybody. You're not gonna take up our time or clutter our inboxes with silly or stupid questions. There's no silly or stupid questions. We want to hear from you. Connect with us on LinkedIn, if nothing else. Oh, another one question. All right, so I've copied that one. Thank you all. Yeah, look forward to the next webinar, and I'll be reaching out to people as well for any suggestions on people who might want to share their career pathway. So thank you again, and it was a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.